Hi everybody. This video is frustrating. This is now my 5th attempt to do this video, which is what I suspect will be video number 3 in this little series that I'm trying to do to lead to step by step a major issue that I want to address. In the last video that I did, which is probably number 2, I talked about condemnation and grace. And I also talked about the fact that Jesus did endorse the law, but he did not live by the law. And I also pointed out that David loved the law, but he also did not live by it. He defied it. He ate the showbread and had his men do too, which was not according to the law. And he rebuked the priests who tried rebuking him. David understood grace. He understood that God loved him. And David knew he wasn't special. He knew God loved the world. But he did understand the law. And the law condemned sin. And man was in a state of sin that man just never understood. David understood that that sin was going to be taken care of because his righteousness was in God. And God promised the Messiah would take care of it. And that's what he lived by. He lived by that. That's what gave him his peace and his joy. And he sang about it, prophesied it in his songs. He foretold what Jesus would do. Now, which is take care of sin. So now, what's led up to all this is, or what's brought this to a head for me, actually, is a recent email. Like I said, this issue has been coming up for a while, and what the issue really is people have a hard time accepting our message for two reasons, really, 2 words. They don't like our words. They don't like our terminology. And one of these words is anger, and the other one is the cross. They don't like them. They don't. They just cannot accept it. And I've got some ideas as why that is. Okay, this is just my take on these issues. If I implied in any way that this is Mike's take, no, this is Jeff's take. It's my take on some subject matter here. We're really just exploring this whole uh, phenomenon, how people can't accept the cross, can't accept God's anger, or that God was angry, and and for a lot of them, it leads them to um, either atheism or the gospel, or the ones who can't accept it tends to lead them to atheism or some spirituality that we're all okay and Jesus was just a good role model. Okay, I'm going to try and give you my take and take this a little further. Just got off the phone with Mike, and it's funny, it's coincidental, because I'm going to address fear a little bit in this fear and freedom in this one. And then I'm hoping the 4th video is the last video, and I'm hoping this kind of serves my purpose to at least get my point across, my take on this back and forth stuff that we've been hearing. So anyway, let me read you that email because I want to point some things out. The writer of the email says, like I told you guys in my last email, I think atheism has the most logical arguments of all, but I'm still open to Jesus being God. But I reject all this God was angry baloney. I'm glad that Mike and Jeff have embraced their homosexuality, but why is it okay for gay people before the cross to have felt condemned? Now, I addressed that in the last video. The only thing I'll say is if I had understood grace like David did, and if I had understood the law like David did, and I lived at the time of David, I would have understood our condemnation in sin But if I had understood it as well as David, I would have known my righteousness was not in that law, but in God and in the coming Messiah. He was the mystery, and we now know that mystery is revealed. So, continuing, what makes me sad is that you guys believe God was like the Westboro Baptist Church before the cross. Speaking for myself, but I don't think we've ever said such a thing or implied that, because God never once was harping on one specific transgression of the law. His issue was sin, the sin of the world. Continuing, let's not forget that Jesus did and said a lot of things that were in direct contradiction to the law while he was walking the earth. I don't think Jesus actually endorsed the entire Old Testament. He may have agreed with parts of it, but only parts. The law wouldn't allow lepers or people with deformities near the temple. Jesus, in contrast, welcomed them. He healed on the Sabbath and when he wasn't supposed to by the law. Well, this is all stuff that even Mike has mentioned over and over, that Jesus himself technically broke the law. He didn't live by the law. He knew what the law was for. He knew the law spoke of him. And this is nothing new. This is stuff we all say. Okay, he didn't condemn the woman caught in adultery, and we're still trying to figure out what Jesus actually said and what might have been added by the church. Why should I feel close to God? This is key. Why should I feel close to God who only loves me because of the sacrifice? This is where all the words are coming in line. At the top of this paragraph, he's talking about how he rejects all this God was angry baloney, and then he says that God only started loving him because of the sacrifice. In other words, after the cross, he started loving him, which means before the cross, God was angry, which he's saying that anger is the opposite of God, is the opposite of love, rather. He's saying that anger is the opposite of love. That's not true. Fear is the opposite of love. And we know that for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. God, it's always been a love story. God loved Adam. God loved man. Now, the word for man, all of humanity, was Adam. It says so in Genesis chapter 5. They were created, these are the generations of man, created male and female, created he, them, and their name, all plural, was called Adam. So that was the name of mankind. So we know that God always loved Adam. And I'm going to get into that more in the last video, the next one, which should be the last one. So, continue on with the email. If God is actually like that, I don't want anything to do with him. I reject the Christian God, and I also reject the Gospel Revolution God. If he's really like that, I'd like to stay in my own little corner of heaven. Okay. That's all well and good. So, let's get to this whole issue of love. See, one of the reasons I know that fear is the polar opposite of love is actually endorsed by John. John says perfect love casts out all fear. Fear and love are polar opposites, and one will push the other away, just like magnets, that when we're going to push each other away. This starts doubling back again on things that I learned when I started embracing grace. And I always looked to what Paul said about love when I was in my Christian mindset, trying to live up to what it is to be a Christian, and be righteous. And Christians are supposed to be known by their love, right? And so love is patient, love is kind, love is long-suffering, and love does not bear records of wrongs, things like that. I'm not quoting it verbatim. Well, let me take you back to my experience. My experience goes back to when I made the turn to embrace grace. That was Um, I was I was 16. I was a very legalistic Christian preacher, and but coincidentally, I was living with a family that was very loving, but I felt very rejected because uh, I witnessed one of my host brothers demonstrate love to one of my other host brothers, and I so wanted them to treat me that way. And so I went off by myself, and I was heartbroken, and I kind of just sort of lifted my heart up to God to show him my heart, thinking maybe he'll soothe me. And something came to mind different than that. I realized my entire perspective of life was based on my legalism of what's right and wrong, how Christians are supposed to be, how people are supposed to be, and they're supposed to be loving, and this is how they're supposed to be loving. I had all kinds of rules about life, and if they didn't live up to the rules the way I understood them, then they didn't love me. Well, I realized that perspective, that legalism, prevented me from love. And I realized it was killing me. I realized it was death. And my youngest host brother, all of a sudden I thought of him, and he didn't view the world that way at all. He didn't look at things as good or evil. He didn't have a measuring stick like I did. All the, things that I was raised with and what the Bible says is right and wrong and all that. He didn't look at moment by moment. He just was open to everything. And I was like, he doesn't view things through my filter, my legalistic filter. And he was a happy person, and he knew he was loved. He enjoyed being loved. He enjoyed loving, and he was very loving. He was a very loving kid. And I was like, that is being alive. I want to be like him. And I realized to do that, I had to forsake. I had to forsake my rules, my knowledge of good and evil, what I thought was right and wrong. And you know what? It was a little bit scary. And this is what Mike touched on, okay, when he brought up freedom. It was a little bit scary because I decided to look at the world the way he did. And the reason I was scared was because I didn't have my measuring stick. I didn't have anything to tell me whether I should trust something or not trust it. I was going in totally into unknown territory. But it took some effort, but I decided I adopted his perspective, and it felt like my brain turned from front to back in my head. And that was the beginning of my free fall. And because I didn't know what to expect, and I was going into unknown territory, and it's a little scary when you're going into the unknown. But I started seeing people and life and myself in a whole new way. And it wasn't, I no longer had an evaluation for everything and every person and every place anymore. It was just discovery. And in the process, something else released in me. The discovery was joyous, and it was a wondrous new world for me. And I started loving those brothers of mine who I resented before, those German host brothers of mine. And I was starting to see that they truly loved me. They didn't love me in a way I expected them to love me or show me love. I started seeing their love for me. And their love for me was so much more beautiful than my despicable idea of how they were supposed to show me love. Mine was my expectation of love, and my definition of love was as filthy rags. It really was. But as I was going into this free fall and just discovering things, that's when grace started to really become understandable to me. And things that Paul had been saying about grace that I had read because I knew my Bible pretty well, started making sense to me. And I realized forsaking the knowledge of good and evil, forsaking my own self-righteousness and what I was to live up to or couldn't live up to, and just realizing my righteousness in grace, I started growing up. And when I realized that I had finally started loving, that love was always in me, I realized the thing that kept me from love, both from within me and from without, was the knowledge of good and evil that I had forsaken. I finally forsook that stuff. And then I realized what Paul said at the end of his long list there in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, he summed it up. Said, when I was a child, I walked as a child, I thought as a child, and I acted like a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. Love is maturity. And not only that, when my love started coming in, see, the knowledge of good and evil, what you expect, creates fears. It doesn't let you trust things. It doesn't let you grow up. It doesn't let you just understand yourself, take responsibility for yourself, enjoy the beauty of life. It doesn't. It keeps you emotionally immature. Paul said when he became a man, he put away childish things. That was at the end of his whole summary of what love is. He concluded by saying that love is growing up. It's putting away childish things, childish rules and expectations, becoming responsible. So, the fear. I had to suppress that fear of the unknown. And in the process of overriding the fear, love came in. Fear is the opposite of love, not anger. You know, that God always loved the world. It's not like he all of a sudden loved the world because of Jesus' sacrifice. That's not biblical, that is not scriptural. It's not like we are not saying that God was angry, therefore he didn't love us until Jesus did what he did. He was angry. You know, when somebody you love does something that is self-righteous, I know for me personally, it ticks me off. It really does. God was angry at the sin of the world. God's anger was kindled at the Israelites all the time when they were doing things for their own righteousness. He said he hated their sacrifices. They stunk to him. He couldn't stand them. And his anger kindled against them. Didn't mean he didn't love them. It's people you love with all your heart that if they get self-righteous, it's going to tick you off somehow. Trust me. Doesn't mean you stop loving them. Alright, let me get to the next video now. Hopefully that sinks in. Alright.